Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing our freshman spotlight series as we go back down to Gainesville, Florida, and talk about Kelby Collins. Dill, this is you normally don't jump on for these. Jumping on for Kelby Collins, probably one of our favorite commits in this Florida Gators 2023 class, and at a position that we've talked so much about, adding talent and adding depth. And they certainly do that with a guy in Kelby Collins who, even if he doesn't start, you figure is going to be heavily included in that defensive line rotation. Going to break down some of the film and talk about reasons why Kelby Collins can be a day one contributor for the Florida Gators. Now, before we get into it again, just want to say thank you to you guys. It's been a blast talking the recruiting trail in 2024 and also taking a look back to that 2023 class and talking about some of our favorite recruits who will be suiting up this year. So if you do enjoy the content and you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, this is a Florida Gators class that we spent all summer talking about how dominant this group is. Kelby Collins, they're getting an absolute freak with him.
And I think the huge thing for them, and I wonder if it's an attractive part for him coming to Florida, is I think he can play early. I mean, you
100%.
look at who Florida lost in the portal last year in Summerall and Powell, two guys that you kind of would have thought were emerging and coming on as guys who could be big-time contributors. And now you do have Princely still on that edge position. But aside from him, if Kelby Collins is kind of as good as we think he will be, I don't see how he does. I don't see who's keeping him off the field as a freshman.
That's kind of where I'm at with him. And especially, I think my favorite part about this is Austin Armstrong likes to give a ton of different looks on the defensive side of the ball, especially up front. And having a guy in Kelby Collins, 6'4", he's up to 275 pounds, is going to be able to play on the inside. He's going to be able to play on the outside. And kind of getting into the film, like this is a dude that shows you on tape that he can do a lot of different things. You take a look back at the senior year numbers, 134 tackles, 18 sacks, 18 tackles for a loss, extremely productive. And Dill, quite frankly, he has that build to play day one, and that's something we talk a lot about.
And they're going to need it. It's like we've been talking about Florida, what they're going to rely on. It will be young football players who can come in and make impacts and then grow into when Lagway comes and the rest of this team fills out. Like, can they be a national championship contender? I mean, guys like Kelby Collins will be the building blocks, and I'd love to see them get their play and be kind of ready to rock and roll as sophomores and juniors, because that's when Florida should be making their runs, if you will.
Yeah, and getting back to this first rep, this is what you're gonna see in the Austin Armstrong defense. Like having your guy, I mean, if you're playing on the edge, like drop back in coverage, and then you see the closing speed. Like it's rare to see big functional athletes like a guy in Kelby Collins. And also, Dill, you take a look at what Florida was against the run last year, giving up almost 5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Like this was a group that struggled to stop the run. And you see Kelby Collins being able to stack, shed blocks, get behind the line of scrimmage. You see the twitched up frame, like a guy that can win with speed around the edge like that at his size. It's truly impressive. And you see the versatility. I mean, lining up three. This is the play that if you're looking at Kelby Collins, like that's just violent. And then the closing speed. He's a big athlete with a ton of power in his hands. And Dill, now I think more the interesting part is taking a look at this Florida depth chart, talking about where Kelby Collins fits in. I don't think I wouldn't be surprised at the slightest if Kelby Collins comes week 8 is a starter on this Florida Gators defense. That being said, something we talk so much about is just the lack of depth that Florida Gators had up front on that defensive line. Now they add 2 guys in the transfer portal in Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks. They also get a guy in Kelby Collins who you take a look back at that 2023 class and look at guys who are day one contributors. Like Kelby Collins is going to fit in that 2 deep, I would think, pretty much immediately for the Florida Gators here.
And one thing Kelby Collins kind of adds that I feel like, again, losing the guys they did, Summerall, Powell type guys, he is a bit of a different player in a sense. I mean, a much bigger, much more physical player. Like those guys, good athletes, obviously smooth movers for their size, but 250-pound, 255-pound guys. Like you're bringing in Collins, a guy who looks like he can play at around 280 and be athletic and be smooth. Like kind of like Rashawn Gary was at Michigan. Like just when you're that big and you can move that well, you add a little different element. I think he'll be a little tougher in the run game, which obviously when you look at what they did against Oregon State, it wasn't good enough. And those guys, they did need to become more physical on this defensive line. So you bring in a Collins, and frankly, you look at TJ Searcy, kind of a similar player, a big guy out of high school. I do wonder if that's where Florida's moving to a little bit, is they want bigger, tougher guys. Because when you play Georgia, you need big, tough guys at every position, tackle, defensive end, to be able to bang.
Especially in the SEC. And I don't know, like you take a look back at this Florida team now, heading into 2023, I think you feel like pretty good about the depth. Now you're going to feel a lot better about the depth in 2024 and 2025 when, I mean, Billy Napier saw this was a problem. I don't think it's only me kind of screaming from the rooftops that this was a problem for Florida. Billy Napier saw it. He goes out and get Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks, who are going to be like two starters, stalwarts on that defensive line. Really, really good football players. Then he goes to the 2024 class and just starts scooping up all these guys in the front seven. You feel better about the depth for this Florida Gators team in 2023, and you can get guys like TJ Searcy and Kelby Collins a lot of reps. You feel really good. And I guess before we close out, like one other guy I just want to shout out, Chris McClellan. Like coming into his sophomore year, Dale, I know you spotlighted him during our deep dive into this Florida Gators team. He's a guy.
He's so good. I also, again, I know I've been saying it, Jamari Lyons is going to play really good football too. I think this defensive line is kind of transforming itself. And it has been a weak spot, I'd say, for Florida since the Mullen days when they used to be able to score with that offense they had with Trask and those really good wideouts. But they've never been a tough defense. You never think, when you think Florida, man, like when you think about Georgia, you're like, oh, I don't want to see that defensive line.
And it's such a bad recipe. It's such a bad recipe to win football games in the SEC when you don't have a great defensive line, because you're going to see a lot of good offensive lines. You're going to see a lot of good running games. If you can't hold up, and Florida really hasn't been able to hold up, and you saw that on display plenty of times last year, it makes it really hard to win football games and get off the field and let your offense cook. I think Billy Napier is slowly transforming this roster. And I think if you're Gators fans, I mean, they're probably tired of us hearing us say this, but the future is bright. And especially when you look at this front seven, specifically the defensive line, and going back to our guy, Kelby Collins, a dude that, I mean, Florida Gator fans get to know him. I think he's going to be moving all along that defensive line. He's athletic enough to play the edge. He's athletic enough or physical enough to play that 3-tech spot. I think Florida got a good one in Kelby Collins, who's going to play a lot. Again, appreciate you guys checking the boys out during our freshman spotlight series. If you got any other names for us to add and kind of take a deep dive into, let us know in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys, and we'll talk to y'all later.